Hello, my name is Luke Cordo, and welcome to an episode of This World is Still. Today we will travel back to 2010 to analyze Apple Inc. and the secret behind their massive profiting through its famous iProducts. Apple is one of the largest electronic hardware software companies in the world, supplying products by the millions while achieving billions in profit. As an American company, we like to think that the workforce employed by the company are not only treated humanely, but also given fair treatment and benefits befitting to any working class employer. However, what if this worker was in fact a Chinese teenager forced to work a 13-hour shift day to day? These images are inside a Foxconn factory inside China, where on the surface may look well a managed factory. However, independent organizations have discovered numerous labor infractions upon its workforce. This include excessively long workout weeks, meager wages, forced to purchase food and essentials from the company itself, and be submitted to a militaristic form of demand from its management to produce record numbers of Apple products. By 2010, 11 Chinese workers had committed suicide due to what was described as ongoing work pressure/demand from not just Foxconn but Apple itself to meet the quota of products it needed to meet the excessive demand. Foxconn took action to ensure that its workforce or its family could not sue the company. One of these such measures was the placing of nets to prevent jumpers from succeeding in committing suicide. Even with Foxconn's undisclosed business practices toward its workforce, some, if not the worst actions by the company became evident in national news media. Take, for example, this clip from the Colbert Report following the mass suicides of Foxconn employees.
A tragic state of affairs, and in response, Foxconn has taken action to ensure the mental health of their employees by making them sign a pledge vowing not to kill themselves. Done and done.
What these contracts really meant was that the families of workers who committed suicide at Foxconn would never be allowed to sue the company for pain and suffering. Even after the suicides, Foxconn continued to deny any effect or involvement leading to these suicides, going as far as to blame the worker themselves for their actions. And it was no different for Apple, as they denied reports of mistreatment to workers, and that any case of mistreatment would be investigated by them only to the extent of an audit. I mean, listen to the bullshit by an interview of Steve Jobs back in 2010.
We're all over this. Foxconn is not a sweatshop. I mean, you go to this place and it's a factory, but my gosh, I mean, they've got restaurants and movie theaters and hospitals and swimming pools, and I mean, for a factory, it's a pretty nice factory.
Interesting. Any comment on that? Well, thank you, Wayne. Now, moving along.
Where's my machine gun? Where's my little machine gun?
Sorry about that. Gets a little carried away, I guess. But the point of this interview with Steve Jobs was to further prove Apple's non-involvement, or rather avoidance, of issues that are relevant to the company and the exploitation of Chinese workers. American contractors and their exploitation of this working class is not a recent issue. Example of this labor barbarity dates back following the end of the American Civil War. In this next video, there are two examples of American exploitation of Chinese workers during the building of our country.
Chinese immigrants began flooding into the United States in the 1850s, attracted by opportunities in the American West. They were escaping poverty and unrest in China and filling jobs in the new American mining and railroad industries.
And they were considered to be very pliable labor, very inexpensive labor, labor that would work no matter what the circumstances were, no matter how dangerous it was.
Within 30 years, about 200,000 Chinese had settled in the U.S. But by the 1870s, a backlash against them had grown large and violent.
They faced a lot of discrimination, a lot of racial intolerance, because they were seen as working for lower wages, taking jobs at a time when unemployment was 25, 30% in some communities. The Chinese become the scapegoat for American workers on the West Coast especially for all the economic troubles.
The railroad companies turned against Chinese workers after they began to organize for better pay and a shorter workday. In 1867, when 5,000 Chinese Central Pacific Railroad workers went on strike, the companies simply cut off their food supplies until the starving workers agreed to return to work 1 week later.
And so there's the throw the Chinese out movement. Labor unions line up with it. The American Workingmen's Party is founded principally on this issue, and they pressure Congress, and Congress eventually agrees to pass its first immigration restriction law in 1882, explicitly targeting Chinese immigrants as undesirables.
The Chinese Exclusion Act banned Chinese laborers from immigrating to the United States for 10 years. It also prevented the Chinese already in the U.S. from becoming citizens. Congress renewed the law in 1892 and made it permanent in 1902. It was not until 1943 that the act was repealed, allowing Chinese immigration and granting citizenship to Chinese nationals already residing in the country. But by then, many once thriving Chinese communities in the U.S. had nearly disappeared.
Do you smell fish?
The most recent link between Apple and the exploitation of Chinese workers dates back a year ago when a small factory owned by the American Jabil Circuit in China had been forcing workers to work excessive overtime hours. This was only discovered thanks to labor watch groups such as the China Labor Watchdog Organization regarding this incident. Labor watch groups have now become the new investigators since Apple is sure not doing its part in good business practices.
From the spike of suicides at Foxconn, we began to question maybe the harsh management methods drive the workers to commit suicide.
Debbie Chan is a project manager for SACOM, Students and Scholars Against Corporate Misbehavior, a labor watchdog group based in Hong Kong. SACOM reported at least 18 Foxconn workers committed suicide in 2010, and more tried.
We began to interview the workers, and then many of them told us they have work pressure. If they made some mistake, they would be punished.
So what have we learned in that concept? The good old American company is only good to those who purchase their products. However, for some who are responsible for assembling these iProduct devices, they are treated perhaps in the worst conditions available, no different from a sweatshop. American companies need to be aware of who they are contracting with and break away from the company should any signs of labor mismanagement be evident. The fact that we have to rely on independent labor watch groups to discover this is very sad and atrocious considering the environment that these Chinese teenagers find themselves in. We need to break away from old traditions. And until we do so, we are never going to restore the faith in the American consumer and the American company.